In Nova Scotia, the Cape to Cape Trail runs 400 kilometers from Cape Chignecto in Cumberland County all the way to Cape George in Antigonish County. It crosses the Cobequid Mountains and the Antigonish-Pictou Highlands. Part of that system is the Gully Lake Nutby Hiking Trail system, which is a network of over 34 kilometers of different trails. And one of those trails is the Rogart Mountain Trail. And that's where I'm on my walkabout today. Over the next 6.5 kilometers, this trail will pass through stands of sugar maple, yellow birch, and old growth lichens. There'll be stone walls, waterfalls, foundations, and look-offs. It's a lot packed into a short trail. This trail system was built by over 100 volunteers of the Cobequid Eco Trails Society in 2008. Much of this trail is on land owned by Sugar Moon Farms owners Scott Whitelaw and Keita Gray. Sugar Moon Farms is a very popular maple syrup producer. More on that later. This is not just a pile of rocks. This wall, which is surrounded by maples, is called the Bone Setter Wall. Peter and Elizabeth Murray emigrated here from Scotland in 1822 with their children. And Peter's job was actually setting bones of horses and humans. He wasn't a doctor, but he was a bone setter. Thus, the Bone Setter Wall. The name Rogart comes from the early settlers. You see, many of them were from Rogart, Scotland. In Scottish Gaelic, Rogart means high plateau. And as I reach the peak of this trail, it'll become clear just how fitting that name is. This rock face is probably 400 million years old, back at the time when Pangea was smashing tectonic plates together. This look-off, which really is more of a look-off in the winter when the leaves are off the trees, is called Christy and Alex's look-off. Christy was the daughter of the bone setter, and her future husband, Alex, well, his family had their property in this area, so it's very likely that Christy and Alex passed along the top of this ridge many, many times. The trail comes into a bit of a hemlock ravine now. This is New Portugal Brook. It doesn't look like much at the moment, but it's been a really dry summer this year. But at times, this can be just a torrent of water going through, especially early in spring. The name New Portugal, not far from here is a place called Earltown. Now, before it was called Earltown, in the early 1800s, it was called New Portugal. And it was named New Portugal because of some of the Scots who had emigrated here and had fought in the Napoleonic Wars in Portugal and Spain. The brook still retains the name, but the town has long since been changed. It's said this brook was the site of a Mi'kmaq ritual in 1819, when Mi'kmaq women put a Scottish baby in the brook in a ceremony to give the baby a healthy fear of water. It's not much of a look-off these days. The trees have grown up quite a bit since the trail was built in 2008. But in the winter, when the leaves have fallen off the trees, or if the trees were a bit shorter, you'd see the Pictou County Mountains in the distance. And if you look down there in the woods and explore a bit, you'll find the old road to Earltown. This plateau is where Andrew and Margaret Sutherland would have had their homestead. Down along the brook, there's still remnants of an old barbed wire fence that would have kept the sheep out of the water. And even in this area, you can see probably what are the remnants of the old foundation. I can feel it starting to get cooler. It was quite warm down in the valley, not anymore. So after long last, I've reached the peak of Rogart Mountain. There'll be a clearing a bit later, but I'm at 1,129 feet. I'm surrounded by old growth, stunted beech. They're stunted because of the weather conditions up here. And now that I'm up here, you can feel the wind. A lonely spruce surrounded by stunted maple and beech. The weather is harsh on the top of Rogart Mountain, and so the trees can't grow to their full potential. In the distance, you can see the Nutby Mountain, the Onslow Hills, and North River. The views on Rogart Mountain are ever changing from season to season. After the break, I'm going to continue heading down the trail and towards a waterfall to see whether our dry summer has left any water in it. And then I'm going to be stopping for some maple syrup at a popular spot that is actually one of the main destinations for people who hike this trail.
Oh, come on, won't you be mine? Feel the sunshine.
As I come around the west side of Rogart Mountain, you can see Nutby Mountain and the Nutby Wind Farm. It's a sign of changing times. The wind that has kept these trees so short is also what enables wind generation. That farm was commissioned about 10 years ago and is one of the largest in the province. It was the largest when it was commissioned. It covers about 400 acres and generates about 50 megawatts of energy. These days, 17% of Nova Scotia's electricity comes from wind. Heading down the mountain, it's worth thinking about how the lands around here are used. This trail wanders very close to the sugar maple stands that are used in the production of maple syrup at Sugar Moon Farm. This trail actually starts and ends right in the parking lot of Sugar Moon Farm. And let me tell you, this hike works up an appetite, and I certainly plan to enjoy some pancakes and maple syrup after this. Before Sugar Moon, there was Boondock Maple Products and Pancake House. That started back in 1973. In the mid-1990s, Scott and Keita apprenticed and took over the farm, ultimately renaming it in the mid-1990s, slowly expanding it and turning it into the popular operation it is today. Hiking Rogart Mountain is an all-year opportunity. In fact, in the winter, Sugar Moon Farm rents snowshoes, or you could bring your own. When the sap runs in the spring, you can tour the entire operation, and you can even enjoy maple syrup poured on snow. This is Letty Rise. It's named after Letty in Rogart, Scotland. It's here where Jane Matheson immigrated in 1818. She would later marry William and become a MacDonald. I'll be passing their homestead a little bit later on. Much of this area would have been part of Jane and William's farm. I've hiked parts of this trail at all different times of the year, and it amazes me just how different it looks. It's well worth coming here in all 4 seasons. This is Jane's Falls. Now, in much of the year, I just wouldn't even be able to stand here, but this has been a particularly dry summer. In the spring, this is a spectacular thin falls. While the Rogart Mountain Trail isn't particularly long, it can be a challenging hike at times. Some of the footing can be tricky, especially as you approach Jane's Falls. In spring, it can get wet in parts, and in winter, the snow can get very deep. But as a loop trail, you are never too far from the start. And even if you don't want to tackle the whole route, you can either do a short out and back at the beginning, or just hike the back end as far as the falls. Whatever you choose, you're sure to enjoy your time. Oh, that's so cool. So this is where William and Jane lived, with their son, Alex. Jane of the waterfall, who came from Leddy, Scotland, Leddy, Rogart, Scotland. William also came from Rogart, but he came from Rovey. They came separately with their parents and got married here, and they had a son named Alex. And the road that brings you up to the beginning of the trail for Rogart Mountain and Sugar Moon Farm, well, that's called the Alex MacDonald Road, named after him. This is all that's left of their home now. A reminder, fallen into the wilderness. This trail simply wouldn't be here without the support of Sugar Moon owners Scott and Keita, in addition to others such as Anne-Marie Fitzpatrick and the Cobequid Eco Trails Society. This was the home of Robert and Nancy Monroe. It was built sometime in the 1800s. In 1901, Alex MacDonald moved here with his wife. The hills around this area are covered in sugar maple stands. Sugar Moon is not just the restaurant this trail ends at. It's a working maple farm, woodlot, and restaurant. They have a whole end-to-end process that supports the slow food movement and local agricultural producers throughout the region. The work of Scott and Keita in supporting this trail, much of which is on their land, is part of that commitment to encouraging people to reconnect with nature. This foundation marks pretty much the end of the Rogart Mountain Trail. This was the home of Peter and Elizabeth Murray. Thinking about the history of this area, Peter was the bone setter who built the wall that was near the start of this trail. And that's the thing, this trail is a loop, and only a couple hundred meters from here is that wall. Also a couple hundred meters from here are pancakes. This will be my final stop on this hike. There's nothing better after a hike in any season than pancakes and real Nova Scotia maple syrup. Making maple syrup is a bit of a magical and mystical process to me. And here at Sugar Moon, they have many varieties. And I can tell you from experience, they're all well worth tasting. Rogart Mountain is a great way to start the day. It's a trail that you can do in the summer, in drier times, or you can do by snowshoe in the winter. And it ends with pancakes. After the break, I'm heading to an urban wilderness to explore Truro's Victoria Park.
Oh, come on, won't you be mine? Feel the sunshine.
Truro's Victoria Park has been a destination for over 100 years. It's considered one of Atlantic Canada's premier municipal parks. People have traveled here to see it from all over New England and Eastern Canada. These days, the park includes lots of different amenities, from a band shell to a playground, swimming pool, tennis courts, and of course, hiking trails. And it's the hiking trails in the lower park that I'm headed off to explore today. It's only a few hundred meters from downtown, but at times you feel like you're much further. The park covers over 160 acres and essentially has an upper and a lower park. The lower park is where you find the tennis courts, playgrounds, and more formal amenities. The upper park is 100 meters higher in elevation and includes a lot of the longer, more isolated trails and mountain biking areas around the town's watershed and a former landfill site. The town's watershed has been in its current location since 1898. It's a man-made lake which is 1.5 kilometers long and produces 470 cubic meters of water an hour for the town. The overflow of the reservoir makes its way through the park. Victoria Park had its origins in 1887 with a land donation of about 10 hectares by Susan Waddell Stevens. About a year later, on July 5th, 1888, 6 more donations created Victoria Park. It was named and opened in honor of the Golden Jubilee of Queen Victoria, and it's full of waterfalls like this, although this one's a bit dry at this time of year, as well as 250-year-old hemlocks, ravines, and just all kinds of magical moments. After the park was created, philanthropists and residents began to add whimsical Victorian-inspired features. In addition to the pavilions and gazebos that were so common of parks of that era, some of the other things added to the park included the Cathedral Dell picnic area, the Holy Well, the Wishing Well, the Forest Graveyard, the Devil's Pulpit, the Irresistible Engagement Seat, and the Lily Cauldron. Some of those features are now long gone, and some have new names, but they were all part of the whimsy and attachment to fairy stories of the Victorian age. You know, in 1943, a ship was launched out of the Pictou shipyard called the Victoria Park, obviously named after this park. That's just how special this place was. It was a ship that served in the Battle of the Atlantic. The water in this river originates in the town's reservoir, about 100 feet higher in elevation. Some of the water also comes from storm runoff from area neighborhoods. This is somewhere you can really see the elevation difference between the upper and the lower park. There are many staircases like this throughout the park to help prevent erosion. This one, Jacob's Ladder, is perhaps the most iconic. It was built in 1906. It's actually a really fun place to come and take photos. And if you're a kid or kid at heart, you can take a challenge of trying to run up those steps. And I'm a kid at heart. I think that's my workout for the next month. And this over here is the Holy Well. It's believed that this is Acadian inspired and perhaps built by residents of Bible Hill who took what had been a well in their area to baptize children and basically built a replica here. And this is the wishing well, one of those whimsical features that the Victorian age users of the park would have put in. The well here feeds off the stream coming down the hill, and it runs pretty well year round. Although of course in the spring, it would be a much stronger flow coming through here. I only ask myself what is just, what is right, and what is in the public good. That's a famous quote in Nova Scotia history from Joseph Howe. Joe Howe is credited with bringing responsible government to Nova Scotia and served in many different political roles, including as premier. These falls are named after him. This is Waddell Falls. It's named for Susan Waddell Stevens, who was that woman back in 1887 who donated the original land that inspired the creation of Victoria Park. This land, including this waterfall, is part of those original properties which she donated. Over 60 years after settlers arrived on Rogart Mountain, philanthropists were dreaming of building a park here in Truro. These days, Rogart Mountain and Sugar Moon is only 30 minutes away from Truro. But back when this park was created, it would have seemed like a world away. Both places are stories of community coming together to build trails and parks for the public good. So wherever your walkabout takes you, give a moment to think about the people who traveled the trails ahead of you.
Hey, come on, feel the sunshine. Oh, come on, won't you be mine? Hey, come on, feel the sunshine. Oh, come on, won't you be mine? Oh, hey, feel the sunshine. Oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, feel the sunshine.